Good morning, and thank you for joining us to celebrate the birthday, life, and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Our nation is experiencing an extraordinary time of division, anger, and frustration. Yet it is instructive to remember that we've been here before. Dr. King's fight for civil rights and social justice began well before the social protest era of the 1960s. But it was then that his elegant voice and brilliant writings were recognized and honored with new urgency and a commitment to action. During that turbulent era, which many of us remember firsthand, Dr. King was an advocate for peace and nonviolence, but his resolve was as hard and unbending as steel. We can take comfort in our time that while the fight for social justice is far from over, his example continues to inspire us, teach us, and motivate us. Again, welcome, and please enjoy and learn from our program. Each year, Virginia Wesleyan University presents an award on Martin Luther King Jr. Day to a student who practices the ideals set forth by Dr. King: courage and conviction in valuing differences, commitment to seeing beyond borders by building inclusion, compassion for humanity, and commitment to social change. During a planning session over 2 years ago, it was suggested that we name the award for a prominent and engaged Black or African American alumnus or alumna. We asked for requests for nominations regarding the naming. One name was suggested over and over again: Mavis McKenley, class of 2011. Mavis earned her Bachelor of Arts degree in business from Virginia Wesleyan's Adult Studies program and currently serves as the Secretary of the Virginia Wesleyan University Board of Trustees. She is Vice President and Trust Officer at AMG National Trust Bank and is also certified as an accredited estate planner, certified trust and financial advisor, and a certified financial planner. Mavis also serves on the Board of Trustees for the Norfolk Public Library and previously served as president for her local estate planning council and board president for Samaritan House, an area not-for-profit organization that provides advocacy and services to victims of domestic violence and homeless families. In addition to those roles, she spent 2 terms on the Virginia Wesleyan University Alumni Council and served as chair of the council from 2016 to 2018. During her tenure as chair, she led the Alumni Council through a crucial period of transformation and growth. I am delighted to share that this year and moving forward, the student award presented on Martin Luther King Day will be named the Mavis McKenley Award in honor of our valued alumna and Board of Trustees member. It's clear to everyone who meets Mavis that she represents the very best of Virginia Wesleyan and a liberal arts education. She is fair, kind, compassionate, and committed to doing her part to promote and advance the goals of Virginia Wesleyan University and the betterment of Coastal Virginia. Congratulations to Mavis on this honor. It is so well deserved.
I want to thank Virginia Wesleyan for this immense honor. I am truly humbled by this recognition, and it grounds me in the belief that we can all take steps to make a difference in our communities and participate in the social contract no matter how small we may feel. When I started my banking career in the early 90s, I was working for a commercial bank in Hackensack, New Jersey. And within several years, I had received a promotion to become a bank officer. I was proud of what I had accomplished, and I assured myself if I continued working hard that I would advance further and would gain the respect of my other bank colleagues. One weekend, I went into the office, and I got on the elevator. And typically during the work week, I would wear business suits. And when greeted on the elevator, I would usually get a good morning or good afternoon and maybe some small talk. But on this Saturday afternoon, when the door to the elevator opened, there was an older white gentleman waiting to enter. I was wearing casual attire, jeans and sneakers. And as I started to say good afternoon, he walked on the elevator and immediately turned away as to not acknowledge my existence. The start of that morning, I felt accomplished and proud of my position in the bank. But in that moment, I realized my accomplishments had very little to do with how I was still going to be perceived by others. I do not know if it was the color of my skin or my casual attire that turned him away, but either way, it was demoralizing. I felt small, and I needed to determine what I was going to do with that information. I did some self-reflecting, and most people that know me know that I am soft-spoken, and I typically like to make people feel comfortable. But in that moment, I also needed to pay attention to making myself feel comfortable. I decided that I needed to speak to people regardless of them acknowledging me, because that is who I am. That I needed to speak out more, and when I felt I could add value or insight to a situation. I began to ask more questions. I made my presence known when I was in a room, where normally you wouldn't even know I was there. I put myself into uncomfortable situations, volunteering to serve on boards, stepping into leadership roles when the opportunity presented itself, and using my voice more and more until I was more comfortable. I think about something I read from one of Dr. Martin Luther King's autobiographies that stuck with me. And it was him talking about how his mother confronted the age-old problem of a parent in America explaining discrimination and segregation to a small child. And he said she taught him that he should feel a sense of somebodyness, and that he was as good as anyone else. This is my wish for our young recipient today, that they know they are as good as anyone else, and that they continue to feel comfortable putting themselves in uncomfortable situations, so their voice can be heard and that they have a sense of somebodyness. We have all seen the unrest and the distressing pictures of our nation's capital. In this moment, we must continue to recognize our young leaders that exhibit courage, compassion, and the commitment to piece back together our fraying social contract. Dr. Martin Luther King is within all of us. Let's keep walking forward. Thank you.
The 2021 Mavis McKenley Award winner is an individual who is widely known by the VWU community for their kindness, compassion, capable leadership, and passion for equity and inclusion. This student leader has continued to demonstrate courage and conviction in valuing differences by seeking educational opportunities, assuming greater levels of responsibility and leadership, and by actively working with campus leadership to help create an inclusive community. Fellow Marlins have noted this recipient's dedication to embodying diversity and valuing differences in every aspect of their life, both on and off campus. Within our campus community, this individual has supported initiatives through various campus departments, including Wesleyan Engaged, Marlin Ministries, the Office of Gender and Sexuality Equity, and the Robert Nussbaum Center. Our recipient is an active participant in deliberative dialogues hosted by the Robert Nussbaum Center, where they may find an understanding of other perspectives, but also engage in civil conversation with attendees that share views and ideals that don't necessarily reflect their own. They also serve as a member of the President's Council for Inclusive Communities and is working on a program entitled Culture 101, where a diverse panel of students will answer diversity questions for the campus. They have worked with our Chief Diversity Officer, Dr. Kuriski, in revamping the faculty and staff Safe Space program, and also modified this program to provide helpful resources to our students as well. Alongside Dr. Kuriski, they worked to create an unconscious bias training for the campus so that individuals can better understand the diversity that surrounds them and how unintentional actions could affect someone's self-worth. Throughout their time at Virginia Wesleyan, our recipient has been an active member and student leader in multiple student organizations, including Spectrum, our student-led LGBTQ+ inclusive group on campus, the Caribbean Student Association, our Black Student Union, the Debate Club, and Planned Parenthood Generation Action, just to name a few. In their various leadership roles, she regularly creates bridges with our other student organizations, bringing students of diverse perspectives and backgrounds together to deepen understanding and cultivate mutual respect across differences. In all of their nominations, this recipient was referred to as a guiding force for change and a shining light, someone who is always willing to share resources to help others on and off campus stay informed, feel included, and take steps towards change. A nominator shared the recipient's unassuming authenticity as an advocate, ally, and change agent make her a worthy recipient of this award, and we could not agree more. Congratulations to India Khanna, the 2021 Mavis McKenley Award winner.
Good morning. Our keynote speaker today is Dr. Francis Rodgers-Rose. Dr. Rodgers-Rose was born in Norfolk, Virginia, and grew up in Portsmouth. She graduated from Morgan State University with honors, majoring in sociology, anthropology, and history in 1958. The young Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was the commencement speaker. 2 years later, Dr. Rodgers-Rose received a Master's of Arts degree from Fisk University in sociology and anthropology, where she was an active participant in the 1960 historic Fisk student movement in Nashville. At Fisk were students who would become the core of the Student Nonviolence Coordinating Commitment. She was friends with Marion Berry, who was president of the Fisk students, and she was vice president. Dr. Rodgers-Rose was also friends with James Bevel, who became the leading theoretician to Martin Luther King, and Bernard Lafayette. The young John Lewis attended a planning meeting at her house. Dr. Rodgers-Rose was also at the first March on Washington in 1963. Dr. Rodgers-Rose was the first African-American woman to receive a PhD in sociology from the University of Iowa in 1964 and was voted the best graduate student that year. She was the first and only Black faculty member at St. Olaf College in Northfield, Minnesota, from 1964 till 1969. From 1969 till 1972, she taught sociology at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. Then Dr. Rodgers-Rose spent 15 years teaching African American studies at Princeton University from 1973 till 1988. Her last teaching position was at Drew University in Madison, New Jersey, from 1988 till 1996. While there, she introduced the first study abroad course to Africa when she taught her students Black culture while in both Senegal and Egypt. Dr. Rodgers-Rose is one of the leading African-centered scholars in the country. She has lectured extensively throughout the United States on topics dealing with Black history and culture, the Black woman, Black family, Black identity, youth motivation, rites of passage, parenting skill development, and cultural diversity. She is editor of the acclaimed volume, The Black Woman, 1980, with her late brother, Dr. James T. Rogers, of Strategies of Resolving Conflicts in Black Male and Female Relationships, 1985. Her last book, Black Womanism, From Antiquity to the Present, will be published later this year. Dr. Rodgers-Rose is a founding member and past national president, 1976, of the Association of Black Sociologists. She is founder and CEO of the International Black Women's Congress, and she has been honored by the National Organization of Black Elected Legislative Women with their highest award, the Noble Woman International Leadership Award in 2000. She was an Essence Magazine Woman of the Month, received the Founder Award from the Association of Black Sociologists. In 2004, she was honored by the Governor of New Jersey, the General Assembly, and the cities of Newark, East Orange, Trenton, and Camden for her community service. She is a member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority and Iota Phi Lambda business sorority. In 2002, Dr. Rodgers-Rose was given a precious gift and a new lease on life when she received a heart transplant. She continues her mission to serve God, her community, and seeks to right the scales of justice. Dr. Rodgers-Rose.
Good morning. Thank you for this wonderful invitation to be your Martin Luther King speaker for this morning. I want to talk to you about the then and now, the redemptive morality and radical practices of Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther was constantly pushing the United States government to live out its principles of justice. His I Have a Dream speech, which was delivered on August the 28th, 1963, before a crowd of 250,000 people. I like to say that I was there at the Washington Monument, was a vision of love triumphing over chaos, love triumphing over injustice, over untruths, over chaos, over falsehoods, over disorder in America. Now, many Americans would have us to believe that Martin never moved beyond the I have a dream speech. That's the only thing we hear every time his birthday. I have a dream, I have a dream. Few people are aware of the beginning of that speech and the life that he lived after that speech. And this is what the beginning says, and I quote, "So we come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, Black and white, would be guaranteed the inalienable rights of liberty and the pursuit of justice. America has defaulted on this promissory note. Defaulted on this note as far as its citizens of color are concerned. America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which is marked insufficient funds. And we've come to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Make Real the Promises of Democracy in 1963. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. End quote. This part of the speech we never heard. We only hear the vision, this dream vision. And had Martin remained the safe, I have a dream, Martin, he would probably be here celebrating his 92nd anniversary. The Swedish social economist Gunnar Myrdal had been contracted with the Carnegie Foundation to do this massive study on the problems of Blacks in America. And they thought it would be best to have an outsider do this study than someone who was an American. And the study went on for about 4 or 5 years. When he finished, it was a 1,500-page volume, and it was entitled An American Dilemma, the Negro Problem, and Modern Democracy. His conclusion in that book said that the presence of Blacks in America has always been a conflict, which he calls a dilemma, in what American society says and what it does. So the ideas of inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness had never been applied to us as Black people in America. In fact, our demands have often been ignored or been viewed as extremists. We're asked to wait a few more years for justice. We have been waiting. Yes, we've been waiting now for 402 years for justice. And in the American dilemma, we still see it today. We see it in the killings of Black people by the police. So that in the last 8 months of 2020, 164 Black people had been killed. We know 2 of these people, George Floyd, who the nation watched murdered in slow motion on television for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. That was on May 25th, 2020. It was from my perspective, it was a Martin Day lynching. On March the 30th, 2020, the police had already broken into Breonna Taylor's bedroom, shot her in the middle of the night 8 times, killing her. And even when police use body cameras, the killings have not decreased in the last 5 years. And Blacks are killed at a rate of 2.5 times more often than whites. And then white people just kill Black people for no reason at all. And most times they're not punished. So Brian Stevenson has documented the lynching of 4,400 Black people between 1877 and 1950 in the United States. And you can see a lot of the names of these people that he has hanging from stone, big pieces of stone in Montgomery, Alabama. But this is what Martin Luther King said, and I quote, "Now people will say, you can't legislate morals. Well, that may be true. And even though morals may not be legislated, behavior can be regulated. And this is very important. We need religion and education to change attitudes, to change the hearts of men. We need legislation and federal action to control the behavior of men. So it may be true that the law can't make a man love me, but it can keep him from lynching me. And I think that that's pretty important." End speech. He went on to say in another speech, and I quote, I never did intend to adjust to the evils of segregation and discrimination. I never did intend to adjust myself to religious bigotry. I never did intend to adjust myself to economic conditions that will give luxury to the few. I never did intend to adjust myself to the madness of militarism and the self-defeating ethics of physical violence. And I call upon all good men of will to be maladjusted, because it may well be that the salvation of the world lies in the hands of the maladjusted. End quote. We may also understand the evolution of Martin and his commitment to truth and justice and righteousness. We must be able to see him continually confront a racist society that was tired of him talking about racism. They were tired of Martin talking about poverty and tired of him talking about the unjust wars. They were tired of him saying, America, straighten up and fry right. Speaking in Alabama, Georgia, on December the 24th, 1967, this is what King said about his I Have a Dream speech. He said, quoting, in 1963, in Washington, D.C., I tried to talk to the nation about a dream that I had had. And I must confess that not long after talking about that dream, I started seeing it turn into a nightmare. Just a few weeks after I had talked about it, it was when 4 little Black girls were murdered in church in Birmingham, Alabama. I watched that dream turn into a nightmare. As I moved through the neighborhoods of the ghettos of the nation and saw Black brothers and sisters perishing on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. Yes, I am personally a victim of deferred dreams, of blasted hopes. So who was this man who in just 4 years had become disillusioned about a society that caused the pain and suffering of so many African Americans. Many of you know his life. He was born into an affluent middle-class family. His father was the pastor of the very prestigeful Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia. His mother was Alberta William King, and it was her father, A.D. King, who was the founder, he was the founding pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church. We know that Martin was a very intelligent child, and at the age of 15, he entered Morehouse College. At the age of 18, he was ordained and licensed by his father to preach. That he went on to Cardozo Theological Seminary in 1948, and he completed his doctorate in theology from Boston University School of Theology in 1955. In October of 1954, at the age of 25, he was the senior pastor at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. Fate would have him there for that fateful day when Rosa Parks, sitting in the black section of the bus, was asked to give up her seat so a white man who didn't have any space to sit in the white section could now move into her section. And she refused, and she went to jail. And her action started the Montgomery bus boycott. And it lasted for 363 days. Blacks refused to ride the bus. Martin Luther King was drafted to become the spokesperson for the boycott. And when it ended, Blacks could sit any place on the bus they wanted. And Martin Luther King was thrust into national head spotlight. So that's how we found him. At the age of 25, he's become this leader. And we look at his life, we know that Martin could have lived a quiet life. He could have lived a peaceful life. He was solid middle class, well-educated, intellect, had a family. He could have taken the safe ground, but he decided to take the high ground. He decided to be a leader for his people, to speak with and be with his people. He learned that it is only through persistence, that society will correct any of its injustices. He learned that you can never let up on a society that is built on injustices. I think often we miss that. And that is, you can never let up on a society that is built on injustices. If you let up, the injustices will come back. So he was indeed disappointed by the majority of white moderates who he said had failed to support the goal of genuine equality. And in 1965, this is what he said, I quote, "But this white failure to comprehend the depth and dimension of the Black problem is far from being peculiar to the government. Even among those whites who like to regard themselves as," and he put that in parentheses, "enlightened," I wonder at persons who dare to feel that they have some paternalistic right to set timelines for another person's liberation. I'm inclined to think that they are more of a stumbling block for Black progress than the White Citizens Council or the Ku Klux Klans, end quote. These words are true today, as they were in 1965. Blacks have often let liberal whites tell them what their strategies should be, and often tell them how much they have already achieved, while Blacks continue to be the poorest group in the country. Martin said, and I quote again, "A nation that will keep people in slavery for 244 years will thingify them, make them things. Therefore, they will exploit them economically. And a nation that will exploit economically will also have foreign investments and everything else, and will have to use the military might to protect them." He said to Americans, he said, "America, you must be born again." And further, I quote, he said, "We have a task to let us move forward with a divine dissatisfaction. Let us be dissatisfied with America until America will no longer have high blood pressure of creeds and amnesia of deeds." And looking at the conditions of Blacks in 1968, Martin Luther King said of America, again, I quote, "I don't plan to let you rest until the day comes into being when all God's children will be respected and every man will have respect for the dignity and the worth of human personalities. America, I don't plan to let you rest until every city hall in this country, justice will roll down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream." End quote. So some of you may remember or know that in 1968, just a couple of months before Martin's death, he was planning with his organization, SCLC, he was planning the Poor People's March. Poor People's March on Washington. Because he truly believed that Blacks had worked too hard in building this country to leave it, and that this country owed us. He said, "We're not going anywhere." And this is his quote. Quote, he said, "Before the Pilgrim Fathers landed at Plymouth Rock, we were here. Before Jefferson etched across the pages of history the majestic words of the Declaration of Independence, we were here. Before the beautiful words of the Star Spangled Banner were written, We were here for more than 2 centuries. Our forebears labored here without wages. They made cotton king, and they built the homes of their masters in the midst of the most humiliating and oppressive conditions. And yet, out of the bottomless vitality, they continue to grow and develop. If the inexpressible cruelties of slavery could not stop us, the oppositions that we now face will surely fail. We're going to win. We're going to win our freedom because both the sacred heritage of our nation and the sacred heritage of the Almighty God are embodied in our echoing demands. And so, however dark it is, however deep the anger feelings are, however violent explosions are, I still can sing, "We shall overcome." So, 43 years after that speech, on January the 6th, 2021, we watched a domestic terrorist situation. We saw terrorists invade our national capital. This was the first invasion of our country since 1812. These invaders said they want to make America great again. Great for whom? Their greatness didn't include Black people. Their greatness doesn't include brown people, Asian people. This whole thing about greater me is like, I want to take my country back. I want to get all these outsiders from out of here. Those people, some of us who've been here before they even thought about coming here. Want to make it great again. But in the midst of all of this insurrection, they destroyed property. They took down the American flag, and some of them put up the Confederate flag. When I watched it, it was like watching white racism on steroids. And then you watched how those insurrectors, how they were treated. People taking selfies with them, shaking hands with them. Contrast that with all force out on January the 2nd. I'm not January, but June the 2nd, 2020, with the Black Lives Matters event. So we don't know what the outcome is going to be, as it relates to this invasion, but it for sure says to us that all is not well. All is not well in our country right now, and we need Martin more than ever. So let me kind of begin to wrap up with a couple of things about Martin. But so what would Martin say about these current conditions? And what would he say about the 53 years since he died and what kinds of changes have been made? And how would he deconstruct the myths of American society and try to bring American society into a reality of what their society really has been like over the last 200 and some odd years, 400 years? I think the first thing that Martin would say is do the right thing. And this is how he said it about his own life. I quote, he said, I decided what I'm going to do. I ain't going to kill nobody in Mississippi, and I ain't going to kill nobody in Vietnam. I ain't going to study war no more. And you know what? I don't care who doesn't like what I say. I don't care who criticizes me in any editorial. I don't care what any white person or any Black person criticizes me. I'm going to stick with the best. And on some positions, cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? And there comes a time when a true follower of Jesus Christ must take a stand that is neither politic or popular. But he must take the stand because it is right. Another thing Martin would tell us is that we need a revolution of morals and values. Martin believed that it was immoral to have 40 million poor people in the richest country in the world. And he believed that unless the United States repented by redistributing its wealth so that the poor could have the basic necessities of life, it would self-destruct. And he raised the question, why do people have to pay a water bill in a world that is 2/3 water? He said, America is morally sick. And then he went on to say, and I quote, a true revolution will soon look uneasily on the glaring contrasts of poverty and wealth. With righteous indignation, it will look across the seas and see individual capitalists of the West investing great sums of money in Asia, Africa, and South America, only to take the profits out with no concern for the social benefit of the countries. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. Another thing that Martin would tell us in 2021 is work for the needy. He said we spend $500,000 to kill one Vietnamese, Viet Cong soldier, while we spend $53 a year for every person in a poverty-stricken program. he described the conditions of Blacks in America as domestic colonization. The conditions of Blacks in America as domestic colonization. And he said, here we spend $35 billion a year to fight this terrible war in Vietnam. But just the other day, Congress refused to spend $44 million to get rid of rats, roaches, conditions in the ghetto. He didn't say they spent $1 billion. No, they only spent $44 million, not even $500 million. It shows you where your priorities are. And that's why King was organizing that poor people's campaign that I've already told you about. He was serious. I'm thinking that was one of the reasons that he was killed. He was serious about bringing 3,000 people to Washington, D.C. to camp out at the Capitol grounds for 100 days. Because he was concerned about why you have all of these poor people, all of this richness, and nobody is doing anything. And then another thing that I think that Martin would tell us in 2021 is that we've got to have committed leadership. Again, I quote him. He said, I've lived over the last few years being involved in the struggle for racial justice. And all too often I have seen religious leaders stand amidst the social injustices that pervade our society, mouthing pious irrelevancies and sanctimonious trivialities. And all too often the religious community has been a tailgate rather than a headlight. And further, he said that the leaders should serve the poor, empowering them to fight against the inhuman conditions of poverty. And he further said, talking about himself, he said, I'm sorry, it's a quote, I'm sorry, you don't know me. I'm not a consensus person. I don't determine what is right and wrong by looking at the budget of his organization, SCLC, or by taking a Gallup poll of the majority opinion. Ultimately, a genuine leader is not a searcher for consensus, but a molder of consensus. And Martin Luther King summed up much of his life struggle, much of his vision in his speech, which many of you may already know, called The Drum Major Instinct. And this was given at a sermon at Ebenezer Baptist Church on February the 4th, 1968, 2 months to the date of his assassination. And in that sermon, he tells us that we all want to be the drum major, have a desire for recognition or importance at first. So, but if the drum major's instinct is not harnessed, it becomes very dangerous. We need to be the first in love, the first in moral characteristics, the first in generosity. True greatness comes not by favoritism, but by fitness. And in closing the ceremony, this drum major ceremony, Martin began to reflect on his life. And this is what he said. He said, every now and then, I I think about my own death. And I think about my own funeral. And I don't think of it morbid, in a morbid sense. Every now and then I ask myself, what is it I want said? And so I leave you words, these words to you this morning. If any of you are around when I have to meet my day, I don't want a long funeral. And if you get somebody to deliver the eulogy, tell them not to talk too long. And every now and then I wonder what I want them to say. Tell them not to mention I have a Nobel Peace Prize. That isn't important. Tell them not to mention that I have 300 or 400 other awards. That's not important. Tell them not to mention where I went to school. I'd like somebody to mention that day that Martin Luther King tried to give his life serving others. I'd like someday to say, I'd like somebody that day to say that Martin Luther King tried to love somebody. I want them to say that day that I tried to be right on the war question. I want you to be able to say that day that I did try to feed the hungry. And I want you to be able to say that day that I did try to clothe those who were naked. I want you to say one day that I did try to love and serve humanity. Yes, if you want to say that I was a drum major, say that I was a drum major for justice. Say that I was a drum major for peace. And I was a drum major for righteousness. And so I end this morning with you saying that you can become a drum major. You can become a drum major for the poor, a drum major for justice, a drum major for peace, for righteousness. And you can join Martin in his redemptive morality and radical practices for justice. Thank you so much.
Hello, I'm Kelly Jackson, and I serve as the Associate Director at Virginia Wesleyan's Robert Nussbaum Center. It is a great pleasure for me to introduce my friend, the Reverend Dr. Melvin T Blackwell. A loving husband and father of 4 children, Dr. Blackwell serves as senior pastor of Little Zion Baptist Church in Smithfield, Virginia. Like Dr. King, who was also a Baptist minister, his life is guided by his faith and call to service. Dr. Blackwell is the founder of Back Home Ministries that focuses on teaching, training, technology, and publishing. He serves as executor of the Pastors University lectures and Forward Leadership conferences and has developed sermon indexing and software for preachers. He holds leadership positions in a number of organizations that include Richmond, Virginia Seminary, the historical Tidewater Metro Baptist Ministers Conference, Hampton University's Ministers Conference, the Baptist General Convention, and the Lebanon, Virginia Baptist Association. His missionary calling has led him to support the people of Kenya and to make periodic trips to the African nation. He's also a member of Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity. I know Dr. Blackwell best through serving together on the board of the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities, where he currently is vice chair. The VCIC works with schools, businesses, and communities to achieve success by addressing prejudices in all forms. In 2018, Virginia Wesleyan became home to the first VCIC satellite office outside of its Richmond headquarters. I have always appreciated Dr. Blackwell's warmth and kindness and admired him for the keen insight and clarity that he brings to the important work of the VCIC. His loving heart and sense of community are evident in all he does. Please join me in welcoming the Reverend Dr. Melvin Blackwell.
To President Miller, faculty, staff, students, alumni, the Marlins, and the Hampton Roads community, I greet you with Jesus' joy, and to God be the glory. I want to talk just for a moment about what I'm calling intentional revaluation. Intentional revaluation. This is the best of times and the worst of times, writes founder and teacher John Piper. He goes on to say, and I quote, "Perhaps this is true at every point in the history of a God-ruled, sin-pervaded world. It was true in 1859, and it is true today." And if you didn't know, it's 2021. Just over 57 years ago, 3 months before I was born into this world, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. opened his heart and poured out from his passion in that literary masterpiece, I Have a Dream. Considered to be among the most iconic speeches in American history. It is reported that over 250,000 supporters gathered on Washington, D.C. at the Lincoln Memorial on that 28th day of August in 1963 to gather together in commemoration of Dr. King and not remember or even make reference to his speech would be irresponsible and incomplete, to say the least. What makes remembering the man and the dream message so intriguing today is that it was 57 years ago in 1963, but it seems like it was written last year in 2020. The question that inquiring minds want to know is why, how is it taken so long for God's will, his dream to be fulfilled? How, why is it taken so long for this nation to rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. How, why is it taken so long for on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and sons of former slave owners to all together sit down at the table of brotherhood? How, why is it taken so long for it to be a thing of the past, for non-whites to live in this nation and not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character? How, why is it taken so long for it to be totally acceptable for little black boys and black girls to all together join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers? And how, why is it that it is in 2021, even in the midst of a pandemic, even in these Hampton Roads communities, we still have the need to engage in conversations about freedom, about equality, about civil and economic rights, injustice, impartiality, systemic racism, diversity, and even hate. inquiring minds want to know. Caring minds want to know. Our children want to know. The world wants to know. Dr. King stated that whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. And I believe that we experienced that last year through the In the Daylight, caught on camera, 8 minutes and 46 seconds killing of George Floyd. He was the one directly affected, but we were all affected indirectly in one way or another. It caused people who cared to cry. And even for those who did not know that they cared, this outcry began to be seen and heard throughout the nation in the form of the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests. These protests, not the riots, look to be a 2020 cry for change, pretty much in line with Dr. King's dream wanting to be fulfilled. The Black Lives Matter outcry, to many, was a righteous cry, and to some it was perceived as a selfish cry. But no, the Black Lives Matter cry comes out of a basic human need, and the cry is to be seen as a human and as a Black person, as a person of color, a human being made by God. It's the original design and the plan of God. Looking back at the book of beginnings, the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Underneath the skin that we're wrapped in, the skin that God made also, we are just the same, blessed and made in the image of Almighty God. In the book of Jonah, we are told of a people who God cared about, who had totally lost their way. The people of Nineveh. God called Jonah to be his prophet messenger, to deliver his message in hopes to save the people. Well, if you don't know the story, Jonah did not agree with God. He ran, he got on a boat, he set sail, then he was thrown into the sea, swallowed by a man-made, or at least God-made Jonah fish, and after 3 days vomited out on dry land. He went back to Nineveh. Oh yes, said what God wanted him to say. The people of Nineveh heard, repented, and were saved. Praise the Lord. But the concluding chapter, chapter 4 of Jonah, begins this way. But it displeased Jonah exceedingly, and he was angry. He prayed to the Lord and said, "Oh Lord, is not this what I said when I was yet in my country, in my country with my people? That is why I made haste to flee to Tarshish, for I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love, and relenting from disaster. And therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live." And the Lord said, "Do you do well to be angry?" And verse 5 says, Jonah went out of the city, sat to the east of the city, and made a booth for himself there. He sat under it in the shade till he should see what would become of the city. Now the Lord God appointed a plant and made it come up over Jonah, that it might be a shade over his head, to save him from his discomfort. So Jonah was exceedingly glad because of the plant. But when dawn came up the next day, God appointed a worm that attacked the plant so that it withered. When the sun rose, God appointed a scorching east wind, and the sun beat down on the head of Jonah so that he was faint. And he asked that he might die, and said, "It is better for me to die than to live." But God said to Jonah, "Do you do well to be angry for the plant?" And he said, "Yes, I do well to be angry enough to die." And listen, the Lord said, "You pity the plant for which you did not labor, nor did you make it grow, which came into being in a night and perished in a night. And should not I pity Nineveh, care for Nineveh, have compassion for Nineveh, that great city in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left, and also much cattle?" God asked that question of Jonah. In other words, what he was saying to Jonah was Nineveh lives matter. This is not to say that other lives don't. It simply and powerfully says that Nineveh lives have value too, just like Black lives matter. Again, this is not to say that other lives don't. It simply and powerfully says that Black lives have value too. You know, we care for the things that we see as having value. We have compassion for things that we see as having value. We show respect for things that we see that have value. We're not so easy to hurt one who we see to have value. We're not so easy to shoot one who we see to have value. And we are surely not so easy to kill ones who we see to have value. You know, it almost seems in America, the darker your skin is, the less value one has. The question is, what now? How did we, over all of these years, become this way? What can we do in the days that are before us? And I'm glad you asked. I'm calling for intentional revaluation. Yes, being intentional about seeing people as God sees them, valuing others as you value yourself. And please know that things will remain the same for another 57 years unless there is a change. In order for change to take place, we have to trust and believe that things that we as a people can change. Like Dr. King, we have to dream the change. We have to see the change. We have to be the change. We have to be intentional about valuing people. We have to make valuing people a core value in our personal lives. We have to make valuing people a core value in our homes. We have to make valuing people a core value in our workplaces. We have to make valuing people a core value in our universities, in our churches, in our communities. We have to make valuing people a core value in our world. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever will trust, will believe in him, will never perish, but have eternal life. His name is Jesus. He came that we would have life and that we would have it more abundantly. He came to destroy the deceiving, the dividing, the destroying works of the devil. He came and commanded that we love one another. Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? Says Dr. King. People fail to get along because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they have not communicated with each other, says Dr. King. My brothers, my sisters, VWU, let's get to know one another. See me, be me, identify with me, respect me, value me, and let us not be they and them, but let us be we. Martin Luther King says, I have decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear. Let me thank you for your time and your attention today. Let me thank Chief Diversity Officer Dr. Brian Karuski. And I thank my God for the opportunity to share with you. I thank him for calling me. And lastly, I thank God for the life and the legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who also said, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. In closing, and in the words of the legendary singer, songwriter, entrepreneur, Sam Cooke, it's been a long time coming, but a change is gonna come. Oh, yes, it is. God bless you.
Thank you to Mavis McKenley, Dr. Rodgers-Rose, and Dr. Blackwell for their remarks, and congratulations to our student award recipient, India Khanna, once again. To our Marlins and friends watching, thank you all for joining in today's commemoration. May we renew each day, as Dr. King did, our commitment to social action, inclusiveness, and justice. May we honor his work with progress of our own and celebrate new voices that in their own way will inspire us to meet the challenges we continue to confront. Thank you.